The war raged across distant lands, a relentless storm of gunfire, smoke, and shattered lives. While soldiers faced the horrors of battle head-on, thousands of miles away, a quiet hero worked tirelessly behind the scenes. Dorothy Jenkins wasn't on the front lines with a rifle or marching with a platoon, but her mission was no less vital. Every letter she penned carried the weight of life, love, and sometimes final goodbyes. She became the voice for those who could no longer speak, the hands that held a soldier's last words when death lingered too close. You may have never heard her name, but in the darkest corners of WW2, Dorothy's words saved souls, brought solace, and carried the heavy burden of truth. Dorothy's days were long and painstaking. She would sit in a dimly lit room, a typewriter before her, stacks of letters arriving from hospitals, field medics, and military officers. Each envelope contained a story: a soldier too injured to write, a mother desperate for a last word, or a young private whose voice had been silenced by the chaos of war. The first time Dorothy opened one of those letters, she knew she could never treat them as mere paperwork. Each message was a life, a person, a family waiting on the other end. Her hands shook slightly as she read the words, realizing the weight of responsibility pressing on her shoulders. Yet she never faltered. Every sentence she typed, every letter she sealed, was done with care, empathy, and a profound sense of duty. What made Dorothy extraordinary wasn't just her precision or dedication, it was her ability to humanize the horrors of war. She could capture a soldier's voice perfectly, often recreating his humor, his fear, or his longing for home. A wounded infantryman might joke about his terrible cooking back home, and Dorothy would carefully preserve that wit, ensuring his family received not only the news, but the essence of who he truly was. Families who read her letters didn't just see a casualty report. They saw the son, the brother, the husband they had loved, preserved in words that were tender, truthful, and hauntingly intimate. But there were days when Dorothy couldn't shield her own heart. Some letters were final, sealed with a note that no one would return home. When she typed these last messages, she had to fight to maintain her composure, swallowing the lump in her throat, her hands stiffening with grief. Many nights, she would leave the office exhausted, carrying the invisible weight of hundreds of lives. Yet she knew someone had to do this work. Someone had to ensure that no soldier's final words were lost to the chaos of war, that families could find closure even if it came wrapped in heartbreak. Her colleagues often marveled at Dorothy's resilience. While others in the office would crumble under the constant barrage of tragedy, she faced each letter with a solemn determination. She became known as the silent messenger, the one who delivered the ultimate truth with grace. And while the world celebrated generals, soldiers, and battles, few recognized the quiet courage required to sit alone in a room day after day, holding the line with nothing but a pen and a typewriter. One letter in particular changed Dorothy forever. A young soldier, barely 19, had written to his mother describing his first day in combat, his fear, and a small joke about missing the pancakes his mother made every Sunday. He was mortally wounded just hours later. Dorothy spent an entire night typing his final words, capturing every nuance, every flicker of humor, every ounce of love he had poured into his letter. When the envelope was sealed, she felt a mixture of pride and grief, a bittersweet reminder of the intimate role she played in this colossal war. This was Dorothy Jenkins' reality. Not the glory of medals or the thunder of artillery, but the quiet, relentless dedication to preserving humanity amid devastation. Through her letters, soldiers were remembered, families were comforted, and the human cost of war was honored. Every day she reminded the world, even in times of unimaginable darkness, compassion and courage could still shine through, typed carefully on paper, one final letter at a time. The war didn't pause, and neither could Dorothy. Each morning she returned to her modest office, where the hum of the typewriter became a solemn rhythm, echoing the countless lives caught in the chaos overseas. The stack of letters on her desk seemed endless, each one heavier than the last. And yet, as exhaustion tugged at her, Dorothy found a strange strength in the stories of courage and vulnerability woven into those pages. These weren't just letters, they were lifelines, bridges between the battlefield and home, threaded with love, hope, and sometimes unbearable grief. Families often didn't realize how much they depended on her. A mother waiting for news of her son might never know the hours Dorothy spent meticulously choosing each word, ensuring her message was faithful to the soldier's voice. Each sentence was carefully weighed, balancing honesty with compassion, so that even when a soldier's life had been tragically cut short, the letter could carry solace instead of shattering despair. Dorothy had learned to walk that delicate line between truth and comfort, a skill honed through months of relentless practice and an unwavering sense of empathy. One morning, a letter arrived from a medic stationed in a remote field hospital. The paper was smudged with blood, the words barely legible. A young private had written a few lines, too weak to continue, asking Dorothy to deliver his final thoughts to his family. She stared at the words, her heart tightening. How could she capture the essence of someone's life in a few typed lines? With trembling hands, she began her work. She reread his message, pausing to absorb the cadence of his voice, the flicker of humor he had managed to inject despite the pain, and the deep love he carried for his parents. Carefully, she typed each word, refusing to let any detail, any emotion be lost. By the time she finished, the envelope felt heavier than any physical weight, yet somehow it carried a strange, quiet beauty, the enduring spirit of a life lived, however briefly. Dorothy's colleagues often watched her in awe, noting how she transformed ordinary paper into vessels of memory and meaning. They joked that she must have a piece of every soldier within her, a fragment of each story stored in her heart. But Dorothy never spoke of this burden. It was hers alone to carry. The emotional toll was immense, yet she never wavered, never allowed fatigue or sorrow to diminish the care she poured into her letters. Each message, each envelope was a promise that no soldier would be forgotten, that their final words would reach home, and that families would know the depth of their love and bravery. Sometimes Dorothy would close her eyes and imagine the families receiving the letters. She pictured mothers reading slowly, daughters clinging to every word, fathers finding pride even through tears. In those moments, she felt a connection that stretched across oceans and battlefields, a bond forged by compassion and the unyielding need to preserve humanity amid destruction. Even as bombs fell and battles raged, her letters were quiet acts of defiance against despair, proof that one person's dedication could make a world of difference. One letter arrived from a soldier who had survived a brutal skirmish but was gravely wounded. He wrote of his longing for home, his regrets, and his fleeting moments of courage. Dorothy worked late into the night, ensuring that every emotion, every tremor of his fear and hope was faithfully represented. When she finished, she placed the letter into an envelope and imagined the family's reaction: tears, relief, sorrow, and the bittersweet pride that comes from knowing a loved one's voice had reached them one last time. Through it all, Dorothy understood that her role went far beyond typing words on paper. She was a guardian of memories, a witness to bravery, and a messenger of humanity in a world consumed by violence. Each letter she sent was a reminder that even amidst war's chaos, compassion could endure, and though she never wore a uniform, she stood on the front lines of emotion and courage, armed only with her pen, her empathy, and an unbreakable resolve. The sound of the typewriter became Dorothy's heartbeat. Each key pressed a pulse that carried the lives of countless soldiers across the ocean. As the war dragged on, the letters kept coming, more urgent, more desperate. Some were written in the trembling hand of a man too weak to lift a pencil. Others were scribbled by medics with little time to spare. And yet, Dorothy treated each one as sacred, aware that for every envelope she typed, she was the final bridge between life and the world outside the battlefield. Every letter was more than words. It was a life story, a fragment of humanity preserved in ink and paper. One evening, a particularly harrowing letter arrived. It was from a young sergeant whose unit had been ambushed during a night raid. His handwriting was erratic, and the bloodstains told a story that words alone could not. Dorothy read it slowly, tracing the curves of each letter, absorbing the fear, the courage, and the love he had for his family. She felt a pang of helplessness, knowing she could not shield the family from the truth, but she also felt a fierce determination to honor his voice. She typed carefully, preserving his humor, his longing for home, even the tiny jokes that made him human, so that when the letter arrived, it would carry not only the message of loss, but also the spirit of the man who wrote it. Night after night, Dorothy sat alone in the quiet office, the world outside her window distant and chaotic. She became intimately familiar with the weight of grief, the fragility of life, and the courage it took to face a world at war. Yet for every letter that brought sorrow, there were those that carried hope, resilience, and love that refused to be extinguished. She discovered that even in the most harrowing circumstances, the human heart could shine through. A young soldier might write of a small victory in battle, a joke shared with a comrade, or a fleeting moment of beauty amidst the destruction. Dorothy captured it all, knowing that these fragments would be treasured, remembered, and carried in the hearts of those left behind. Some letters were simple, brief messages that barely filled a page. Others were long, rambling accounts of fear, courage, and longing. Dorothy approached them all with the same dedication, reading and rereading each line, ensuring the essence of the soldier remained intact. She learned to sense the rhythm of their voices, to detect the subtle pauses and inflections that revealed who they truly were. By the time she sealed the envelope, the soldier's presence felt tangible, as if he had whispered directly to her, trusting her with the most precious words of his life. The office staff often remarked on Dorothy's uncanny ability to bring the letters to life. Some thought she had a gift. Others whispered that it was almost supernatural how she could channel each soldier's spirit onto the page. But Dorothy never considered it a gift. It was a responsibility, one she bore with solemn pride. Each letter was a chance to preserve dignity, to honor sacrifice, and to remind families that even in death, their loved ones' voices could endure. Dorothy remembered one soldier in particular, a young corporal who had written about the small comforts of home, his favorite songs, and the pride he felt in serving his country. He was killed in action the very next day. As Dorothy typed his final words to his family, she felt the enormity of her role. She was entrusted with the final imprint of a life, the last echo of a soul. She poured every ounce of empathy, patience, and care into the letter, knowing that when it reached home, it would carry the soldier's spirit across time and space. Even as the war intensified and the letters multiplied, Dorothy never wavered. She became a quiet force, a guardian of stories, a messenger of love and loss in a world consumed by destruction. She understood that her work was more than clerical duty. It was an act of profound humanity. Through her dedication, she transformed tragedy into remembrance, despair into connection, and silence into enduring words that would echo in the hearts of families forever. By the time the first light of dawn filtered through the office windows, Dorothy would finally close her typewriter for the night, exhausted but resolute. She had carried the weight of countless lives, the grief of parents, the longing of soldiers, and the love of those who could never be silenced. In a war defined by destruction, Dorothy Jenkins preserved what made life worth fighting for, the human heart, immortalized through the final letters of the brave. Every morning, Dorothy Jenkins returned to the office with a quiet determination that defied the chaos of war. Outside, the world was consumed by battles, bombings, and uncertainty, but inside her small, dimly lit room, a different kind of war was being fought, the war for memory, dignity, and the preservation of humanity. Each envelope she opened carried the weight of life, and sometimes the unbearable finality of death. She had grown used to the smell of ink and paper, the faint rustle of letters, and the solemn silence that accompanied her work. Yet the emotional toll never lessened. It only became a companion she carried with unwavering resolve. A new batch of letters arrived from a field hospital near the front lines. One, in particular, caught her eye. A young private had written to his sister, barely able to hold the pencil in his trembling hand. His words were fragmented, a mix of humor, fear, and longing for home. Dorothy paused, reading them slowly, feeling the rawness of his emotion seep into her chest. She took a deep breath and began typing, carefully reconstructing his voice, ensuring that his essence would survive the journey across the ocean. Every word mattered, every sentence preserved his humanity. As she worked, Dorothy reflected on the strange intimacy of her task. She never met most of the soldiers whose letters she transcribed. She would never hear their voices or see their faces, yet she knew them intimately through the words they left behind. Their fears, dreams, and courage became part of her own life. Some nights, she would close her eyes and imagine their stories, the battlefield chaos, and the families waiting at home. The responsibility was immense, yet she embraced it fully, understanding that each letter could be the last connection between a soldier and the world they loved. One letter that arrived was particularly harrowing. A young corporal, wounded during an ambush, had scribbled his final thoughts in a shaky hand. He spoke of the friends he had lost, the small victories of the day, and the overwhelming longing to return home. Dorothy read and reread his words, feeling the depth of his bravery and the fragility of life. She spent hours carefully translating his emotions into her typewritten letter, preserving the humor, pride, and love that defined him. When she sealed the envelope, she felt a bittersweet satisfaction, knowing that even in death, his voice would reach the family who loved him. Dorothy's work was not without challenges. The letters were often incomplete, torn, or smudged with blood and mud. Some contained cryptic messages that required her to read between the lines, to sense the soldier's intent, and to translate fear into words of clarity for the family. She became a master of empathy, intuition, and precision, understanding that every word mattered, every nuance could carry a lifetime of meaning. Her colleagues often marveled at her skill, but Dorothy never considered it extraordinary. It was simply her duty. Despite the overwhelming sorrow, there were moments of joy and tenderness. Some letters arrived filled with hope, humor, or small anecdotes that brought a smile even to her weary face. A soldier might write about a shared joke with his comrades, a letter to a sweetheart, or the excitement of a minor victory on the battlefield. Dorothy treated these moments with the same reverence as a final letter, understanding that even the smallest details mattered. They were fragments of life, precious and fleeting, preserved against the backdrop of destruction. Her role as the silent messenger grew more significant with each passing day. Soldiers trusted her with their most intimate thoughts. Families relied on her for closure, and the world, though oblivious to her name, depended on the humanity she preserved. Dorothy Jenkins became a guardian of memory, a bridge between life and death, and a reminder that courage took many forms, not all of them visible on the battlefield. When the sun set, casting long shadows across her desk, Dorothy often paused to reflect. She had typed hundreds of letters that day, each one a testament to bravery, love, and sacrifice. Though the world outside remained engulfed in war, inside her room she had preserved humanity. One letter, one soldier, one story at a time. And through it all, she remained steadfast, knowing that her work was not just clerical, but a mission to ensure that no soldier's voice would ever be lost, that every final word would endure, and that love could survive even in the darkest hours of history. Dorothy Jenkins had long stopped counting the letters she had typed. To her, they were not numbers or tasks. They were lives, souls suspended in ink and paper, waiting to cross the oceans and reach the hearts of families desperate for any news. Every envelope that arrived on her desk carried urgency, heartbreak, hope, or humor, sometimes all at once. And every letter demanded the same care, the same dedication, the same unyielding attention to detail. Dorothy knew that a single misworded sentence could break a heart or obscure a life, so she typed with precision, compassion, and a quiet intensity that few could comprehend. One afternoon, a letter arrived that made her pause longer than usual. It was from a young soldier, barely 18, whose handwriting trembled with exhaustion and fear. His words were simple, yet they carried immense weight. a message of love to his younger sister, an apology for missing milestones, and a tiny joke about missing home-cooked meals. Dorothy's eyes welled with tears as she read, but she knew that sentimentality had no place in her work. Her task was to honor him, to capture his voice so his family would know him as he truly was, even if the war had stolen him from their arms. She typed carefully, preserving every nuance, every flicker of humor, every ounce of courage. The war outside was relentless, but inside Dorothy's office, a different kind of battle was fought. Each letter was a confrontation with mortality, grief, and the raw human emotion of war. Sometimes the sheer volume of letters was overwhelming, each one a reminder of lives lost, dreams cut short, and families left in suspense. Yet Dorothy never faltered. She had developed a rhythm, a process that allowed her to channel the emotions in the letters without succumbing to them, to give life to words that might be the last anyone ever heard from a soldier. Her colleagues often wondered how she managed it, how she could endure the constant exposure to death and despair. Dorothy never gave them a definitive answer. To her, it wasn't endurance, it was duty. She had accepted early on that her role was crucial, not just to the soldiers who relied on her to convey their final thoughts, but to the families who awaited each letter with hope, fear, and desperate longing. Every word she typed was a lifeline, a fragile connection across the vast, terrifying distance of war. There were letters that made her laugh quietly in the solitude of the office. Some soldiers wrote about trivial moments, losing a hat, sharing a chocolate bar, a comical mishap in the mess hall. But even these small anecdotes held immense significance. They were reminders that behind the uniform and the battlefield, there were humans with humor, quirks, and love. Dorothy preserved these details with care, knowing that they would bring comfort and a sense of normalcy to families amidst chaos. Yet for every laugh there was sorrow. Many letters contained final words, messages meant to console, encourage, or impart love in the moments before a soldier's life ended. Dorothy approached these with solemn reverence. She spent hours, sometimes nights, ensuring that every detail, every emotion was perfectly captured. She knew that for families, these letters were not just paper. They were the last touch, the final connection to a loved one. One particular letter haunted her for weeks. A young private, wounded in a brutal skirmish, had written of his longing for home and the pride he felt serving his country. Dorothy typed it with painstaking care, ensuring his voice resonated. When the letter was finally sent, she imagined the family reading it, tears, relief, heartbreak, and love all intertwined. The weight of responsibility pressed on her, yet she felt a quiet pride, knowing that she had preserved a piece of someone's life, immortalized their courage and humanity. Dorothy's work, though invisible to the wider world, was monumental. She became a bridge between life and death, between fear and solace, between despair and hope. Each letter she sent was an act of courage, an affirmation of humanity amidst the devastation of war. And though she never wore a uniform or stepped onto a battlefield, her legacy was no less heroic. She was the quiet heartbeat of compassion, a guardian of memories, a messenger whose dedication ensured that no soldier was forgotten and that the human heart endured even in the darkest hours. The hours in Dorothy Jenkins' office stretched endlessly, yet time had little meaning when measured against the weight of the letters before her. Each envelope told a story, whispered a fear, or carried a final confession of love from a soldier too wounded, too exhausted, or too young to deliver it himself. She had become the keeper of these voices, a silent witness to bravery, grief, and humanity. Every morning she faced the mounting pile with quiet determination, knowing that what she typed was more than words. It was a bridge between the battlefield and the home waiting anxiously on the other side. One letter arrived that stopped Dorothy mid-motion. It was from a private who had been on the front lines for weeks, writing to his mother. His penmanship was shaky, his words fragmented, yet they carried a raw honesty that pierced Dorothy's heart. He spoke of the terror of battle, of camaraderie, of fleeting moments of laughter amidst chaos, and of his longing for home. Dorothy read and reread the lines, absorbing every nuance, every trembling inflection. She began to type, painstakingly reconstructing his voice, so that when his mother received the letter, she would hear not just his words, but the essence of who he was. Working late into the night, Dorothy found herself immersed in the private's life. She imagined his laughter echoing in quiet moments, his hesitation before daring acts of bravery, and the love that clung to every word he wrote. To her, these letters were living entities, fragile yet enduring, capable of bridging oceans and time itself. She typed each sentence with reverence, ensuring that the soldier's presence lingered, that his humanity endured beyond the horrors he faced. Yet the emotional toll was heavy. Some letters contained final words, messages sent hours or even minutes before a soldier's life ended. Dorothy approached these with solemnly, feeling the weight of grief in every keystroke. Her hands would tremble, her chest tight, but she pressed on, understanding that families needed these words more than she needed solace. To deliver the truth with compassion was a sacred duty, one she bore with unwavering resolve. Amidst the sorrow, there were fleeting moments of relief and humor. Soldiers often wrote of small victories, practical jokes, or cherished memories of home. Dorothy preserved these with equal care, knowing that they carried the heartbeat of life amidst war's relentless destruction. These lighter moments reminded her that her work was not merely about death. It was about capturing the fullness of life, the humor, courage, and love that survived even in the darkest times. Her role as a silent messenger had grown over time. Military officials trusted her to maintain the integrity of each letter, and families depended on her to convey their loved ones' thoughts faithfully. Dorothy became more than a typist. She was the guardian of souls, the voice of the silenced, and the bridge between despair and solace. Colleagues often remarked on the burden she carried, yet she bore it without complaint, understanding that her responsibility was monumental. One particular letter left an imprint on her soul. A young corporal, wounded and isolated, had written a final message to his parents, expressing pride, love, and small jokes he hoped would comfort them. Dorothy typed the letter meticulously, capturing his tone and personality. She sealed the envelope with care, imagining the tearful yet proud faces of the family reading it, and she felt the bitter satisfaction of preserving a life's essence. Day after day, the cycle continued. Letters came, were read, typed, and sent, each one demanding the same attention, empathy, and skill. Yet through the endless repetition, Dorothy never wavered. She understood that her work, though invisible to the world, was heroic in its own quiet way. Each letter she sent carried the weight of history, the depth of human emotion, and the courage to endure. Through her dedication, the voices of soldiers lived on, bridging the gap between war and home, between life and memory, between love and loss. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across her desk, Dorothy Jenkins would finally rest, knowing she had done more than type letters. She had preserved the heart of humanity in a world consumed by war. The letters kept coming, each one a fragile thread connecting a soldier in the chaos of war to the family waiting anxiously thousands of miles away. Dorothy Jenkins sat at her typewriter, the dim light of the office casting long shadows across the stacks of paper. She had learned to approach each letter as both historian and confidant, capturing not just the words, but the essence of the human being behind them. The war raged relentlessly outside, but inside her room, a quiet battle of empathy, precision, and compassion unfolded every single day. One envelope in particular drew her attention. It was from a young private who had been wounded during a night raid. His words were brief, almost hesitant, yet every line carried the depth of emotion that war had forced upon him. Dorothy carefully read his letter, absorbing the humor he tried to inject, the fear he couldn't hide, and the love he had for his family. Her fingers hovered over the typewriter keys, trembling slightly. She knew the stakes of her task. Every word, every nuance had to convey the soldier's true voice. She typed with meticulous care, recreating the rhythm and inflection of a voice that might never speak again. The office had grown quiet except for the clicking of the typewriter and the rustle of paper. Dorothy became lost in the life of the young private. She imagined his mornings on the battlefield, the laughter shared with comrades, the letters he had written in secrecy to avoid showing vulnerability, and the small hopes he clung to. She poured all of that into the letter, preserving his spirit for the family who would hold it as a final testament of his humanity. Each sentence carried weight, each paragraph a delicate balance between truth and compassion. Some letters brought laughter even in the midst of sorrow. Soldiers would describe small victories, moments of absurdity, or trivial observations that hinted at the normalcy they longed for. Dorothy captured these details with equal reverence, understanding that even in the darkest hours, the human heart could shine through. These fragments of life were as precious as the final words of the dying, proof that courage and humor could survive even the most brutal circumstances. Yet the burden of final letters weighed heavily. When a message arrived from a soldier who would not survive the night, Dorothy approached it with solemn reverence. She typed slowly, carefully, preserving the humor, love, and bravery embedded within, knowing that for the family, this letter would become the last connection to someone they cherished. She imagined the tears, the grief, the bittersweet pride, and allowed her work to honor their loss without diminishing it. Dorothy's role extended beyond simply typing words. She was the guardian of memory, the interpreter of silences, and the conduit of voices that could no longer speak. Colleagues often remarked on the emotional toll she carried, but she bore it quietly, understanding that her duty was critical. Every letter she sent bridged oceans and battlefields, bringing comfort to families and preserving dignity for soldiers who had given everything. One particular letter haunted Dorothy for weeks. A young sergeant had written to his mother, recounting a fleeting moment of joy with his comrades and expressing his pride in serving his country. Hours later, he would be gone. Dorothy spent an entire evening ensuring that his voice, his humor, and his affection were perfectly represented. When she finally sealed the envelope, she felt both grief and quiet satisfaction, knowing that the soldier's essence would live on in the hearts of those who received it. Despite the relentless flow of letters and the weight of responsibility, Dorothy never wavered. She became a pillar of resilience, a silent hero whose work transcended the office walls. Her dedication ensured that no soldier's voice would be lost, no final thought ignored, and no act of love or bravery forgotten. Each day, she preserved the human heart in a world consumed by destruction. And as she finally pushed back her chair at the end of a long day, the hum of the city outside blending with the distant echoes of war, Dorothy Jenkins knew that her work mattered. She was more than a typist. She was the keeper of souls, the bridge between despair and solace, and a testament to the enduring power of compassion in the face of unimaginable loss. The office was quiet except for the steady rhythm of Dorothy Jenkins' typewriter. Day after day, the same ritual unfolded. Letters arrived, she read them, absorbed their weight, and carefully transcribed each one with unwavering care. Each envelope was a life suspended in time, a final testament of a soldier's voice, sometimes tender, sometimes fearful, sometimes laced with humor. For Dorothy, every letter mattered, every word mattered. She knew that across thousands of miles, a family's hopes, sorrows, and love hung in the balance, waiting for the words she would carefully send into the world. One letter arrived that immediately drew her attention. It was from a young soldier, barely old enough to vote, who had been injured in a chaotic skirmish. His words were hurried, shaky, and filled with the quiet bravery of someone confronting mortality for the first time. Dorothy read carefully, feeling the raw emotion in every sentence, the vulnerability behind his courage, and the love he desperately wanted his family to feel. She typed slowly, each keystroke a bridge between his fading voice and the waiting hearts at home. Every word preserved his essence, every phrase a lifeline for the family who might never hear him speak again. Her work demanded more than skill. It required empathy, intuition, and a resilience forged in the fires of human emotion. Many colleagues admired her ability to maintain composure amidst the constant deluge of grief. Yet few understood the quiet exhaustion, the weight of carrying countless lives in her hands, or the sleepless nights spent ensuring that every word honored a soldier's life. To Dorothy, it wasn't just work, it was a mission, a solemn responsibility to preserve dignity, love, and humanity in a world consumed by chaos. Some letters carried glimpses of light, small fragments of joy that broke through the despair. Soldiers wrote of camaraderie, whispered jokes with fellow troops, or simple pleasures like the taste of chocolate shared in secret. Dorothy preserved these moments with as much care as the final letters of the dying, knowing that even the smallest details of life carried immense value. These words reminded her and the families who would receive them that even amidst the horrors of war, life, humor, and love could survive. Yet for every laugh, there was heartbreak. Some letters brought news that a soldier would never return home. Dorothy handled these with profound care, shaping her words to carry comfort, closure, and a sense of presence. She imagined the mother, sister, or spouse reading the letter, feeling the soldier's voice across the page, and she typed with precision and reverence, understanding that her words were the final bridge between life and death. One letter in particular stayed with her long after it was mailed. A young sergeant had recounted a fleeting moment of hope, pride in his service, and love for his family. Hours later, he would be gone. Dorothy spent hours typing his final message, ensuring that every nuance, every flicker of personality, and every ounce of affection was faithfully conveyed. When she sealed the envelope, she felt a mixture of sorrow and pride. The soldier's voice would live on, and the family would carry a part of him with them forever. Her work as the silent messenger was more critical than any uniformed hero on the battlefield. She bore witness to lives that could not be spoken out loud, preserved the humanity of those consumed by war, and delivered messages that would echo across generations. Her work, though unseen by the wider world, was heroic in its quiet, steadfast way. Each letter she sent was a triumph of empathy over despair, of human connection over chaos, of love preserved amid destruction. As the office clock ticked late into the night, Dorothy finally leaned back, exhausted but resolute. She had typed dozens of letters that day, each one a testament to courage, devotion, and humanity. And though the world outside was engulfed in war, inside her room she had preserved the heart of it, the voices, the love, the courage, and the memory of those who would never return. Through her dedication, Dorothy Jenkins proved that one person's quiet heroism could echo louder than the roar of any battlefield. The office lights cast a warm glow on Dorothy Jenkins as she sat surrounded by stacks of letters. Each envelope was a portal into someone's life, someone's fears, loves, and courage, carried across thousands of miles from battlefields she would never see. Every day brought a new wave of messages, some urgent, some fragmented, some final, and each required the same unwavering dedication. Dorothy understood that she was not merely typing words. She was preserving the essence of life, immortalizing voices that the world might otherwise forget. A letter arrived from a young soldier who had been wounded during a surprise attack. His penmanship was shaky, but his words carried the humor and pride that defined him. Dorothy read carefully, tracing the rhythm of his voice and the subtle inflections of his personality. She typed each line slowly, making sure to preserve his essence. She imagined the mother receiving the envelope, feeling the love and bravery of her son through every word, a lifeline connecting them across the vastness of war. Some letters made her smile quietly amidst the sorrow. Soldiers wrote of small joys, sharing a laugh with comrades, finding beauty in the simplest of things, or recalling cherished family memories. Dorothy preserved these with as much care as the most solemn final letters. These moments reminded her that even in a world torn by violence, the human spirit endured. She knew that families would treasure these glimpses of life, these snapshots of normalcy amidst chaos. Yet for every joyous letter, there were heartbreaking ones. Dorothy handled them with the solemn reverence they deserved. Letters written in a soldier's final hours were typed carefully, preserving humor, love, and courage. She imagined the family reading these words, tears mingling with pride, and felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Each letter was a bridge between despair and solace, and she was the guardian of that connection. One particularly haunting letter came from a corporal who had survived a brutal engagement but knew his wounds were fatal. He wrote with bravery, sharing fleeting memories of home, expressing pride in serving, and conveying love for his family. Dorothy typed his message meticulously, capturing every nuance and emotion. When she sealed the envelope, she felt the immense responsibility of her role, ensuring that the soldier's voice, his spirit, and his love would reach those who awaited it, even after his passing. Through it all, Dorothy became more than a typist. She became a lifeline, a silent witness, and a guardian of humanity. Colleagues often marveled at her resilience, but she never sought recognition. To her, it was duty, an unwavering commitment to preserve life, even in the midst of death. Each letter she sent was a testament to courage, empathy, and the enduring power of the human heart. As the night deepened, Dorothy leaned back, exhausted yet resolute. She had typed countless letters that day, each one of someone's life, preserved for those who loved them most. And while the world outside remained consumed by war, inside her office she had ensured that humanity, love, and memory endured. Through her dedication, Dorothy Jenkins proved that heroism did not always wear a uniform. Sometimes it sat quietly at a typewriter, bridging the distance between life and death, hope and love, courage. Dorothy Jenkins had long stopped counting the letters. To her, they were more than assignments. They were lives, memories, and voices entrusted to her care. Each day she faced the weight of countless stories, the humor of a young private, the love of a soldier writing to his family, the courage of those facing the battlefield with trembling hearts. She typed with reverence, precision, and an empathy so deep it became a lifeline for families waiting anxiously thousands of miles away. A letter arrived one evening that brought all her emotions to the surface. It was from a young sergeant, wounded and exhausted, writing to his mother. His words were simple yet profound, expressions of love, fleeting humor, and pride in serving his country. Dorothy read slowly, absorbing every nuance, every flicker of personality, and every ounce of courage. She began typing, carefully preserving his voice so that when the letter reached home, it would carry the essence of the young man who had poured his heart onto paper. The war outside was relentless, but inside Dorothy's office she waged a quieter battle, a battle to preserve humanity. Each letter she typed became a bridge between life and death, between despair and solace, between love and loss. She understood that her role was critical. Families depended on her words. Soldiers entrusted their final thoughts to her, and she bore the responsibility with unwavering devotion. There were moments of light in the darkness. Soldiers wrote of shared jokes, small victories, or memories of home that brought smiles even amidst the horror. Dorothy preserved these moments with care, knowing that they carried the heartbeat of life, fragments of normalcy in a world consumed by chaos. These letters reminded her that even in war, the human spirit could endure, and that love, humor, and courage could survive across oceans and battlefields. Yet the letters of the dying weighed most heavily. Dorothy approached them with solemn reverence, carefully choosing every word to convey comfort, dignity, and presence. She imagined the family reading each letter, tears and pride mingling as they absorbed the final voice of the loved one who had been extinguished too soon. These letters were not just communication, they were lifelines, connecting the living and the dead in a fragile, sacred bridge that Dorothy alone could preserve. Her colleagues often marveled at her resilience, but Dorothy never sought recognition. She did not type for glory or praise. She typed because she understood the profound weight of her task. Each letter she completed was a triumph of empathy, courage, and compassion. She became the silent heartbeat of the war, the guardian of memories, the messenger whose dedication ensured that no soldier's voice would ever be lost. One particular letter would remain with her forever. A young private had written of his dreams, his humor, and the love he carried for his family. He died before seeing it delivered. Dorothy typed it meticulously, imagining the family reading, crying, laughing, and holding on to the final words of a life that had been extinguished too soon. In that moment, she understood the full magnitude of her role, to preserve humanity, even when the world sought to destroy it. As the final envelopes of the day were sealed, Dorothy leaned back, exhausted but resolute. She had typed hundreds of letters, each one a testament to courage, love, and the enduring strength of the human heart. Through her quiet heroism, she had bridged distances, comforted families, and immortalized lives that the world might have otherwise forgotten. Dorothy Jenkins had no uniform, no medals, no battlefield glory. Yet in her small office, she had performed a heroism that echoed louder than artillery, endured deeper than fear, and touched hearts more profoundly than any victory. Her letters would live on, a timeless reminder that even amidst war's darkness, compassion, courage, and humanity could prevail. And in that, Dorothy had changed the world, one letter, one soldier, one life at a time.